Hello and welcome, dear friends. I'm delighted to have Imram Giri as my guest again. Good afternoon, Imram. Jai Sai Ram to everyone. Jai Sai Ram. We continue our series of discussions dedicated to the foundational principles of the Kriya Yoga tradition. I'm Svyatoslav Dubyanskiy, joined once again by Imram Giri, my guest. We are both followers of this unique yet multifaceted spiritual path. Today we return to exploring questions that are not just important, but truly fundamental to the practice, its key elements. I have a long list of questions before me. It would take numerous episodes to explore them all. The first topic I'd like to raise concerns Shambhavi Mudra, a specific positioning of the eyes. I have several related questions that will lead us into a vast and seemingly inexhaustible subject. Eyes are often described as the mirror of the soul. At the same time, they play a distinct role in meditative practices. Eyes can be closed, open, or half closed. Let me begin to gradually unpack this theme. At the outset, could you comment on the difference between meditating with open versus closed eyes? We'll leave aside for now what the term open eyes actually means. How does this affect the buddhi, our intellect, the manas, our mind, and consciousness in general? As we know, quite a few schools within the more Hindu-leaning traditions of yoga insist, no, the eyes must be closed, don't keep them open. In various Buddhist schools, take the Vajrayana tradition for example, meditation is practiced exclusively with open eyes. There are also approaches that favor a half-open gaze, so I'll pass the word to you now at this very intriguing point. This subject deserves an entire episode in its own right. It calls for a deep and thoughtful discussion, and I sincerely hope we won't have to rush it. Let us take the time it deserves. Indeed, Shambhavi Mudra is a core aspect of Kriya Yoga. Without it, meaningful progress becomes extremely difficult, and I'll explain why I say that. First, it's essential to recognize, and you rightly pointed this out, that nearly 90% of our energy and attention flows through the visual center. The eyes are our primary interface with life. Therefore, a person cannot fully assess a situation or process information without the aid of sight. It's hard for an average person with an average mindset to orient themselves in the world with their eyes closed. You've probably heard this before. For people who begin to lose their sight, it can feel like saying goodbye to the world itself. There's a deep attachment to vision. Why is this attachment so strong? Because the visual center is essentially given the role of solving almost every challenge we face in the material world. People are conditioned to look and to see. They communicate with this world through the eyes. And so the overwhelming majority, 80% or more, of our perception and experience of life and existence is filtered through sight. Sadly, this creates suffering in the long run. When a person embarks on the spiritual path, they encounter this sublime tool, Shambhavi Mudra, sometimes pronounced Shambhavi. Some say Shiva, others say Siva. Pronunciation varies depending on the region in which a person lives. It can differ from one place to another. Consider Sivka or Shivka Burka. Technically, the sh sound in the word Shambhavi should be soft, according to Sanskrit pronunciation. This language still has an influence upon us, even if we know nothing about it. Mudra operates according to the same principle. Even if we don't know how important it is for us, it still works. When children close their eyes, newborns, if you've ever observed newborns as they fall asleep, you must have noticed their eyes tend to roll upwards, and their tongue retracts. We've spoken before about Kriya Mudra. This is nature at work. When we close our eyelids or faint, our eyes roll upward. To an observer, it can look fearsome. I've found myself in situations where I had to assist someone in regaining consciousness. These were individuals afflicted with mental or neurological conditions, particularly those affecting the medulla oblongata, who experienced seizures during epileptic episodes. I often witnessed their eyes rolling up involuntarily, and I will explain why this happens. Turning the eyes upwards, in essence, helps direct consciousness inward. I always emphasize that Kriya Yoga is the science of God realization. Yoga itself is a science, and Kriya is its deepest understanding, a direct perception of that knowledge through elevated awareness. The degree to which one can grasp it depends entirely on the level of one's consciousness. Kriya, as the science of God realization, teaches us that virtually all bodily functions are encoded within the nuclei of the medulla oblongata. I spoke about this previously when we discussed Shambhavi Mudra. The visual center, in simple terms, the human eyes, is linked with the medulla oblongata. For those studying or intending to study anatomy, it's important to know that the optic nerves connect directly to this part of the brain. And when a person consciously lifts their gaze upwards, the medulla oblongata begins to awaken and develop more actively, forming new neural connections and initiating new programs. In effect, all of Kriya Yoga, every technique, whether leading the practitioner towards advanced methods or introducing a beginner to these aspects of the practice, revolve around a single principle. That principle is known as the awakening of the spiritual center, which we refer to as the ajna chakra. Fundamentally, this is the sixth center we work with. We do not actively engage the seventh center, as it represents total unity and dissolution. This is the realm of the nirvikalpa samadhi. The transformative work takes place in the ajna chakra. However, the ajna chakra exists on the subtle plane. This is a high astral realm, a focused radiance of power. It is known as the mystical throne of Babaji himself. If we seek to understand where Babaji truly resides, then we must aspire to this center. This is how it works. Those who practice deeply and consistently, reaching advanced levels of development, experience his presence there directly. This is not necessarily the visual image of Babaji seated in a lotus posture, though it may appear that way to some. Rather, it is an image of the Supreme Presence. On the physical plane, every chakra relies on particular organs and systems. If you examine an anatomy atlas, comparing it with maps of the nervous system, you'll find that the locations of the chakras align exactly with nerve plexuses. This makes it easier to identify where to focus one's awareness during practice. The medulla oblongata lies adjacent to the region of the ajna chakra. The ajna chakra is not just a point, but a bundle of energy concentrated on the subtle plane. This is light that embodies the entirety of the spiritual power, and this is why the brain itself can be regarded as the ajna chakra. This light is concentrated in the region of the pineal gland and the medulla oblongata that lie close together. And all these organs function in harmony with this principle. When we consciously raise our gaze, we stretch the optic nerves, which are linked directly to the medulla oblongata. This action prompts the brain to redirect its functioning inward, because the life energy that descends from on high, by default, requires outer expression in accordance with certain laws. The task of a yogi or a practitioner is to turn the energy inward. Thus, when we raise the gaze, draw the tongue back, and concentrate on specific inner areas or centers, we create the conditions for this reversal, allowing the energy to remain within us. The Ajna chakra becomes the focal point of this power. When we practice Shambhavi Mudra, sustaining the upward gaze, we cultivate the exact conditions necessary for awareness to turn inward. How does this occur? By activating the right hemisphere of the brain. The right brain becomes more active when we consciously look upwards and partly close the eyes. It's important not to close them fully. That's another technique we'll address in due course. With this eye position, up to 90% of the energy that is flown outward through the visual center is redirected inward. After practicing a while, mental activity begins to settle. The thoughts inevitably quiet, a natural consequence of the sustained upward gaze. This alone pacifies the mind by approximately 50%. One must grow accustomed to it. We naturally remain entangled in our attachments, and the body imposes its demands. Our 5 basic senses that are so attached to the external world are linked to our bodies. Our task is to pacify the 5 senses, to dissolve them into the mind, into manas. This is the purpose. And the path to liberation, to enlightenment, is both clear and direct. We must shift our senses inwards and dissolve them into manas, the lower mind, and then dissolve manas into the cosmic consciousness. In other words, manas must dissolve into the sublime buddhi, the divine intellect, the cosmic consciousness. This process unfolds through practice, pranayama, pranakriya, focused concentration, bija mantras. All these elements are engaged. But for now I am speaking of the greater conceptual framework. Cosmic consciousness ultimately dissolves into Atman. And with that, the matter is settled. Shambhavi Mudra bestows full action upon the practitioner. What is a mudra? It is what directly influences the work of the endocrine system, impacting specific internal organs. We have asanas. They facilitate communication between our consciousness and the body. Through these asanas, consciousness interacts with the body. An asana is a correct positioning of the mind, which then shapes the body accordingly. It begins to exert profound influence on the nerve endings, the systems of the body, the flow of energy, and so forth. A mudra is a more self-contained system. It serves as a means of accomplishing particular goals. Infiltration, nidra, is also related to this. Linguistically, the Russian language reflects Sanskrit roots, so it is highly desirable to accomplish this goal, to perform mudras correctly. Take Shambhavi Mudra, for instance. When one consciously raises their eyes and sustains the upward gaze, discovering the precise and righteous, but above all correct position of the eyes, one can enter samadhi effortlessly. Effortlessly, but it requires the correct eye position. Attaining the proper eye position requires some preparedness. At the very least, the eyes must be conditioned not to tire easily. In the beginning, the eye muscles may fatigue. The upward angle creates tension. This will ease with time. Interestingly, in states where energy spontaneously awakens, the eyes naturally rise upward without effort. There is no resistance in such moments. This is why Shambhavi Mudra holds such significance. The upward gaze activates the right hemisphere of the brain. We know that the right brain is associated with the higher intuitive dimension, the realm of the divine. While the left hemisphere governs logical reasoning, it is not confined to engagement with the external world alone. Through interhemispheric connections, it communicates with the intuitive faculty of the right brain. Our task is to come to understand this intuitive dimension. This is how we gain knowledge. However, it is a mistake to claim that the right brain is divinity and the left brain merely logic, or to regard the left hemisphere as lower or inferior. The two hemispheres cease their inner conflict once the interhemispheric connection is established, a process achieved through practice. When the right brain is active and dominant, it invites the left to turn inward and to comprehend subtle processes. This is inevitable. Therefore, in meditations on sound and light, we also activate the right brain. It is sensitive, and in that regard, its nature is more subtle. Through the recognition of this inner vibration, wherein Shambhavi Mudra plays a pivotal role, of this internal sound, we attune ourselves to the inner knowledge that awakens higher awareness. As we awaken to this knowledge, our awareness grows. Shambhavi Mudra must be practiced, and it must be practiced gently, in a relaxed state, in an atmosphere of joy and receptivity. It is vitally important for practitioners to consciously raise the eyes upward and attune themselves to the awareness of their own essence. The one who practices Shambhavi Mudra correctly, and correctness emerges naturally through consistent practice, can attain unity with Shiva, with Brahma, unity with the higher self, the goal to which they aspire. It all depends on one's inner motivation. If the goal is liberation, then this unity with the higher self gives rise to the awakening of true realization of the unity with the higher self. Over time, through the proper practice of Shambhavi Mudra, Kachari Mudra, and Prana Karma, or Prana Kriya, one can attain complete identification with the higher self, and this, in essence, is liberation. This is a brief explanation. Now, let us also reflect on the meaning of the word Shambhavi or Shambhavi. It is a name I hold in great reverence. It is one of the names of Shiva. Shiva, Shambho, Shambhava. Shambhava, in the most literal sense, is one of Shiva's names. But it is also a philosophical term. It means self-emerged. And this meaning is profoundly connected to practice. Why? Let us take, for instance, biblical texts, the Christian Bible, and the Vedic Puranas, Shiva Bhagavata. In both traditions, a divine being is said to create the universe. In the Old Testament, it is said that the world was created in 7 days. In the Vedas, 7 sages assist Lord Brahma in the act of creation. The number 7 appears in both, and rightly so. These are the 7 chakras of creation. What is particularly interesting is this. When we immerse ourselves in the state of Advaita, or non-duality, which exists universally, actually, Advaita is not limited to Vedanta. It is the highest Tantra. It is part of Buddhism, of Sufism, and even of Christian Gnosticism, all of which culminate in union with consciousness. But then a question arises. If individual consciousness dissolves into absolute consciousness, if there is absolute consciousness, who created whom? This is where the name Shambhavi Mudra, or Shambhavi Mudra, becomes significant. It is a name of Shiva, but also a philosophical term, the self-emerged, the self-created. Who created Shiva? The question almost borders on the absurd. He created himself. He was not created by anyone, but in practice. When a meditator begins to experience the qualities of Shiva consciousness within themselves, then who created you? And it is here that a tremendous realization dawns. My teacher, Yogi Ramaya, often spoke of Shiva's name. and the philosophical term Shambhavi or Shambhava, and with good reason. Ultimately, no one created man. At a certain level of understanding, one can say that God created us, whether in the biblical or Vedic context. But in essence, each of us is self-created. Like Shiva, each of us created themselves, jivas. Jiva means an individual soul. This is the essence of Shambhava, the realization of one's own self-creation. In truth, the individual self is like a mirage. Only Shiva remains, which is translated as absolute consciousness. Thus, the name of this mudra, referring to the eye position, is truly fascinating. It reflects the destination of Advaita, the state of non-duality you have spoken of, and the profound philosophy its name conveys. Now, to comment further, this principle is a cornerstone in the teaching of Kriya Yoga. And to my joy, in all authentic Kriya Yoga traditions, the practitioner is encouraged to seek Babaji within the Ajna and Sahasrara chakras. This does not negate the pilgrimage to the beautiful Himalayas, yet only those who have first discovered Babaji's presence within the Ajna chakra are able to find him in the Himalayas. The Himalayas are known for their vast open spaces, beautiful tours, treks, mountains reminiscent of the Alps. And yet, in order to meet him there, one must first encounter him within, in the space of the Ajna and Sahasrara chakras, which is facilitated by Shambhavi Mudra. In the tradition of Yogi Ramaya, to which I belong, we practice specific techniques that include various forms of Shambhavi Mudra. We shall later discuss these variations. Most of them are performed with either closed or half-closed eyes. And here I fully agree with you. Even with the eyes closed, during deep meditation, they naturally turn upward. No effort is needed to raise your gaze when you enter a deep meditative state. It naturally lifts of its own accord. It's a phenomenon I have witnessed repeatedly, and I'm sure it aligns with your own experience teaching others. Many practitioners report this paradox. We are often told, close your eyes and enter your inner world. One might still be looking around, out of the window, or at the room. So the phrase, let's close our eyes and enter our inner world, sounds reasonable. Yet what actually happens? People close their eyes only to find themselves immersed in an even greater flood of thoughts and emotions. There are traditions, Hindu and Buddhist tantric schools, that suggest the opposite approach. According to them, meditating with the eyes open aids in working with the stream of thoughts. The idea is that closing your eyes and immersing yourself in your inner space. It is easier to dissolve into the blissfulness of meditation. Paradoxically, when people close their eyes to find peace, they are met with a storm of thoughts. When the eyes open, we encounter dozens of distractions around us. Yet when we close them, we face millions more within. This is where Shambhavi Mudra again plays a vital role. Through different eye positions, we can redirect the flow of thoughts as required. It operates much like breathing techniques do. We will explore the science of breath in a dedicated episode titled Kriya Yoga, the Foundations of Breath. Yet let me briefly note that breath directly affects our self-talk, emotional state, energetic capacity, level of concentration, and presence in the moment. Breath governs all these. So yes, Kriya Yoga is also a science of breath. How we work with our gaze directly influences all those aspects we've mentioned: self-talk, concentration, and so forth. But let's be honest, how many people, especially beginners, can even sustain concentration for a full minute? I recall an encounter from around 30 years ago. I met a Buddhist teacher from Japan, Terasawa Hunsei. Perhaps you've met him. He was an extraordinary teacher who spent many years living in Russia and Ukraine. This was in the early 1990s. And I can't quite recall if I had already visited Yogi Ramaya at that point. Perhaps I had, perhaps not. His approach was purely Buddhist, rooted in Japanese Zen. There was a small group of us at the time, and I vividly remember one thing he said. If you can meditate for even 10 seconds, you are a great meditator. If you can maintain it for 1 full minute, you are already approaching the level of the Buddha. That statement left a lasting impression on me, because as you know, people tend to measure meditation in terms of hours. I meditate for half an hour or for 3 hours every day. Later, Yogi Ramaya would almost repeat this statement word for word. One master said it, and then another echoed it, and this was the moment when I truly understood this truth. If you can meditate for even 10, 15, or 20 seconds, you are approaching the level of a siddha, one who has attained perfection. Because the vast majority of practitioners cannot truly meditate for even 10 or 20 seconds. True meditation is the dissolution into the ajna chakra, radiating the light of absolute consciousness. And this is where it is so important to maintain one's gaze. The next question arises quite often, and many of our viewers who practice meditation have likely experienced it themselves. We look around, distractions are everywhere. We close our eyes, and then we're really distracted. We expected meditation, but instead, we're swamped with a million thoughts. There aren't even that many distractions around. How would you comment this? Is it perhaps better to meditate with eyes open? Firstly, let's acknowledge most people who believe they are meditating are in fact merely imitating meditation. It's more like a performance. Legs positioned like butterflies' wings. Fingers placed just so, displaying the appearance of meditation. By the way, Sai Baba once made an important remark regarding Jnana Mudra. He said that we shouldn't hold our fingers like this, because this way we are joining the divine with the ego, and the ego must be concealed. Instead, the divine finger should be positioned like this, covering the index finger that symbolizes the ego. I hope our viewers are able to see clearly the correct positioning I'm demonstrating. The divine finger should fully cover the index finger. This reveals the psychological significance of the gesture. Mudras powerfully work on the inner dimension. Whether one is using Jnana Mudra or Kalachakra Mudra from the Tibetan mystical tradition, each gesture activates specific internal processes. Maintaining a specific eye position is also a mudra, and of course most people simply cannot attain the required state. In fact, psychologists have studied this. They've concluded that one can maintain one-pointed attention for about 6 seconds. After that, the mind instinctively seeks new stimuli. In my view, all of Kriya Yoga, when practiced correctly, gradually leads to a state of detachment, initially incomprehensible, but later consciously understood. This is the state where the practitioner diverts energies from the 5 basic senses that tether them to the external world, thus preventing them from entering a meditative state or reconnecting with their own essence. As long as the 5 senses are active, we should rely on our magnetism and Kriya Yoga practice to draw the energy inward, into the internal divine cave. I frequently speak of this. The altar, which is our spine. By doing so, we consciously disengage from the 5 primary senses, which otherwise stimulate the restlessness of the mind. The mind is so active because of bodily reactions, and these bodily reactions are tied to the 5 senses. There are others, yes, but these 5 dominate: sight, hearing, smell, touch, and taste. They provoke thought, fueling the active mind. Consider something as simple as blinking. Each blink is a kind of thought. In everyday life, when we communicate with others, this is natural. Many times I've watched great yogis, realized masters like Satya Sai Baba. At times he would breathe deeply, blinking occasionally. His eyes remained open, and sometimes he would become utterly still, motionless, his gaze fixed in one direction for long periods. This could last for a minute, or 30 seconds, or even just 10, doesn't really matter, and it happened quite frequently. To the best of my knowledge and based on my own perception, Bhagavan Sri Satya Sai Baba continuously remained in the state of nirvikalpa samadhi, a condition that enabled his presence in the physical world, while all inner processes remained under the full control of a sublime consciousness. This is the ideal towards which all awakening people, committed to their own development, should aspire. Various approaches can be used to achieve this. Let me clarify. I begin from this perspective because along the path, it is inevitable that people will ask, what am I meant to do with all this? How can I dive into it straight away? People do not always grasp these aspects. Therefore, there's a clear understanding of this topic. The mind is in constant pursuit of knowledge. It feeds upon it. Once it acquires knowledge, it settles. Knowledge brings tranquility. People often stop at this point. I know, I comprehend. Yet, until one has experience, one has comprehended nothing. There are different schools and traditions. Some meditate with eyes fully closed, some with eyes half open or half closed. I find a distinction between half open and half closed eyes. And I would like to highlight something once emphasized by Yukteswar Giriji, the great Jnana avatar. He pointed out an error that had crept in during the transcription of the Vedas. The original Sanskrit term for the root of the nose had been mistakenly altered to mean the tip of the nose. This statement was made by the Jnana avatar himself, and this is why it can be fully trusted. If someone does not trust Yukteswar Giri, a master who has attained complete liberation, and who is in essence a living embodiment of God, then such a person has no real need to continue their spiritual practice. This is not a matter of blind belief. It is the lived experience of the master in whom we place our faith. It is not blind faith. If you wish to verify it, then do so, through sincere practice. But to test a master, you must first reach the same heights. Yukteswar Giriji explained that in Sanskrit, the terms for the root of the nose and the tip of the nose sound very similar. Due to this confusion, vast sections of the Buddhist world now practice meditation with half-open eyes. And not only the Buddhist world, but also certain Hindu traditions. They focus on the tip of the nose instead of concentrating on its root. The root of the nose is between the eyebrows, just above the bridge of the nose. This is the site of Shambhavi Mudra. By misplacing their gaze, much is lost. Yes, many meditators still attain elevated states of consciousness. With years of sustained and disciplined practice, a certain peace of mind can certainly be achieved. However, when it comes to activating the deeper inner mechanism essential for profound inner realization, it fails. Because with lowered gaze, you enter. Modern psychologists confirm this. When a person looks downward, they unknowingly slip into a depressive state. Consider a child being scolded by their parents. The child, physically smaller, drops their gaze to the floor while the parent looms above. The full weight of anger, the entire pressure of the world descend upon them. I'm talking about psychology behind depression. In contrast, when a person has the habit of looking straight ahead, their ego is awakened. They can look others straight in the eye. They are open to the world and unafraid, or at least their fears are minimal. They are in command of their state. At such moments, the optic nerves subtly lengthen and stimulate the medulla oblongata, resulting in a gentle activation of consciousness and an increase in confidence. And when the eyes are lifted upwards towards the heavens, towards the spiritual center, the heavens represent the spiritual center, and the crown of the head represents the dome of our inner temple. Our body is our temple. You extend the optic nerves, as well as the sublingual nerves, thus stimulating the medulla oblongata to awaken and actively draw in the energy of the spirit, the energy of the creation, of the primordial creator, if you like. In this way, we find unity with the Holy Spirit. Awareness is magnified exponentially, sometimes by thousands or even millions of times, depending on the conductivity of one's consciousness. However, merely lifting the eyes and maintaining the upward gaze without concentrating on one's spiritual core, on the lofty idea of one's own spiritual realization, on God or His presence, simply put, without practicing yoga, will only produce a mildly settled state, a form of one-pointedness. Yet this alone will not bring true realization because you are not really part of the process. There must be no mechanical actions. What is required is conscious kriya, conscious action. Action is kriya. Kriya means a conscious action. We consciously raise and maintain our gaze. This, by the way, is something unique to human beings. No other creature on earth can do this. A chameleon, for instance, can look in different directions with its eyes, searching for prey. But this is an unconscious action, a marvel of nature. Some subtle process or entity governs it, perhaps the chameleon's egregore, figuratively speaking, but not the chameleon itself. Only a human being can consciously lift their eyes. Dogs are close friends, elephants, cats, or horses. None can raise just their eyes upwards. They must lift their whole heads to look up. They lack this mechanism. Animals possess only 2 chakras, whereas humans, as more evolved beings, have 7. Understanding this is crucial. And I completely agree that when people close their eyes, the subconscious mind begins to reveal countless images. Why so? Because when one lifts their gaze, or at least closes their eyes, the connection with the outer world is cut off, and the subconscious awakens to release these programs. The subconscious mind, filled with countless images, begins to project them like movies, often far from pleasant, onto the screen of our awareness. Various images and recollections arise so they can be released, much like dust or steam rising from a heated surface before eventually dispersing. But in doing so, the mind reveals our attachments. For example, a past event might come to mind and capture my attention. I begin analyzing it, and naturally thinking follows. Any image through attachment compels us to continue thinking. This is why masters advise keep your eyes half open, so that the awareness remains balanced between inner and outer worlds. At the beginning of the path, I used to recommend closing the eyes and raising them upwards. Interestingly, when people exert some effort to raise their eyes, their eyelids tend to part slightly. That is enough. If I were to instruct someone to keep the eyes half open, they might interpret it too literally. This is a method used by some teachers. They would leave their eyes open, remaining continuously connected to the external world. Their awareness would drift outward again. Instead, I now suggest this. Let the eyelids fall gently, not tightly closed, and then raise the eyes within. And the eyes will slightly open. This is enough. When performed correctly, even the whites of the eyes become visible. It can be an unsettling sight, even frightening. Let us continue reflecting on the legacy of Sri Yukteswar Giri, the brilliant astrologer and master of Kriya Yoga who walked this earth a century ago. Among other contributions, he provided a precise interpretation of complex Sanskrit terminology within the context of the Bhagavad Gita. One of the most significant topics he addressed is the presence of Kriya Yoga in the Bhagavad Gita. I even hesitate to speak on it. It's such a vast subject. Perhaps it would be best to explore it across future videos. We've spoken about this before as well. I've already published many videos with commentaries on various chapters of the Bhagavad Gita from the perspective of Kriya Yoga. And I can assure you, there is not a single chapter that does not contain the essence of Kriya Yoga. One simply needs to see it. Of course, our attention is most often drawn to chapters 5 and 6, where Krishna more overtly explains the method of meditation. The 6th chapter delves a little deeper. The 5th presents it in a more accessible form. Consider the renowned Vishvarupa Darshana chapter, where Krishna reveals his cosmic form. Vishvarupa Darshana begins with Krishna telling Arjuna, "Arjuna, you cannot behold my cosmic form because your eye of wisdom is closed. I must first open your eye of wisdom for you to be able to perceive my cosmic form." And then Krishna opens Arjuna's eye of wisdom, allowing him to behold his cosmic form. You can often hear the followers of the Hindu tradition saying, "Arjuna saw 1,000 arms or 1,000 faces." This is really powerful. But the essence of this story lies in Krishna opening Arjuna's eye of wisdom through Shaktipat, enabling him to perceive the real significance, not merely the arms or faces. Okay. In chapters 5 and 6, certain Sanskrit terms arise which can be translated and interpreted differently. This is where confusion often begins. Not because the words have been deliberately altered, no. The words remain, but their interpretations shift. One of the interpretations of the Bhagavad Gita, where does it originate in the first place? We encounter this not only in the Buddhist tradition, but in the Hindu tradition as well. Chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita instructs the reader to sit in a specific posture, breathe in and out, and focus on the tip of the nose. And so readers of the English, German, or Russian translations naturally begin to ask, what was the original Sanskrit term? How was it translated? Yukteswar used to draw people's attention to potential errors in translation. The word itself is legitimate and ancient, yes. The meaning. Yes, it is not the tip of the nose, but its root. In fact, there are several key points. The root of the nose itself, the space between the eyebrows slightly higher up, and the center of the forehead. Shambhavi Mudra can be focused on any of these points. In fact, Sri Yukteswar, known for his strictness, once remarked, "Squinting is the only outcome that such a practice can produce." This statement was made by Sri Yukteswar himself. That's right. And I couldn't help but recall it. That said, I do agree that many schools, both Hindu and Buddhist, place the focus on the tip of the nose. And to be fair, there is nothing inherently wrong with this. The tip of the nose is also an energy center, where lateral energy channels converge. We have many channels on the right and left sides of the body, some of which extend to the eyes and the nose, including its tip. The tip of the nose is part of a chain that ultimately links to the center of the brain. You know, there is a railway from Moscow to St. Petersburg that a Russian emperor designed by simply drawing a line with a ruler, only for a finger to obstruct the way. But here, it's like traveling from Moscow to St. Petersburg, via Novosibirsk, Tokyo, and beyond. Yes, there is nothing inherently wrong in focusing on the tip of the nose, but the journey becomes far longer. Anyway, the tip of the nose is linked to the inner guha. Let's remember this term. The word guha means a cave located in the center of the brain. From the perspective of Kriya Yoga, living in a cave doesn't mean living in the Himalayas. This cave is to be found where the Ajna Chakra resides. I've journeyed many times to the Himalayas and their foothills. You did as well, but maybe you visited other regions of these mountains. And I'd like to invite everyone to the Himalayas. You can meet ordinary people there who read newspapers, watch TV, and enjoy a good chat. Don't assume that simply being there will place you in a meditative state. The Himalayas are a sacred place, yet they are not devoid of social interaction. Why? Because only the person who has first settled in an inner cave, within the Ajna chakra, can truly live and meditate in the Himalayas. For the one who is not, even the Himalayas will offer no help, and it will feel as dense and noisy as New York, Moscow, Berlin, or London. So these variations in interpretation of the terms, particularly within the 5th and 6th chapters of the Bhagavad Gita, are of immense importance. Next, I would like to raise an equally challenging question regarding Shambhavi Mudra. There are various traditions and schools that suggest 5 or 6 points of focus. Let's review and analyze them one by one. I should say at the outset that some of them were recommended by my teacher, Yogi Ramaya, while others were never even discussed by him. Some have been already clarified, such as the tip of the nose. There's nothing wrong with this, but it is not quite the point originally intended. Along this line, we have the bridge of the nose, which serves as a point for concentration. Slightly above, by perhaps a centimeter or so, is the space between the eyebrows, which represents a vastly different dimension. Beyond that, we have the possibility of directing our attention to the center of the forehead. Though physically invisible, one can mentally raise the gaze even higher still. Finally, there is an option where the gaze is mentally directed towards the soft spot. Physically impossible to see, but possible at the level of a thought pattern. Through inner vision. We begin by concentrating on the bridge of the nose where glasses rest. Then shift the focus to the space between the eyebrows, eventually raising it to the center of the forehead and soft spot. How would you comment on these points? There are more points worth exploring, but let's start with these ones. To help people realize the importance of concentration, we suggest practicing the basic Shambhavi Mudra. I will now explain how I instruct this practice, so it becomes clear how the work proceeds from the standpoint of the Kriya transmitted through this consciousness. I begin by saying, simply lift your eyes upwards at about a 45-degree angle and look into space at a distance of about 25 to 30 or maybe 40 centimeters. This helps the practitioner become accustomed to holding their eyes in this position, because people often notice that as soon as they try to inhale from the Muladhara chakra, their eyes involuntarily drop downward in an attempt to observe the process. Or they may be successfully maintaining an upward gaze, but the image of the Muladhara chakra arises as a distraction. However, the principle remains. Energy flows where attention goes. Why must the eyes be lifted like this? Because the upward position of the eyes helps sustain connection with the higher. Because the physical position of the eyes, even the basic Shambhavi Mudra, establishes a psychological and spiritual link to the higher. When people say, "Oh Allah," what do? Speaking of Muslims. Or Christians, "Oh God," they raise their eyes, turning towards the divine. Pose of Seraphim of Sarov. Yes. Various postures may be used as outward expressions, yet they are always accompanied by an uplifted gaze. For true yogis, this inner work is conscious. They understand precisely what they are doing. Thus, external gestures are not strictly necessary. One can simply sit quietly with the eyes raised. Consider the portrait of Babaji, where his eyes are lifted upwards. Of course, it's a painted representation, since photographs of Babaji do not exist, save for those rare moments when he allowed his image to materialize. He is the only one. Babaji was looking at those who saw him. It's difficult to understand how to raise the eyes, but this knowledge is preserved and transmitted by teachers, knowledge passed down by Babaji himself. Yet the essence of Shambhavi Mudra is simple to understand. The eyes are lifted upwards. Once spiritual transformation begins and energy becomes consciously active, the eyes will find the necessary position. At that point, the practitioner is ready for the next stage of Kriya, where Bindu points are introduced. These Bindu points are centers that your consciousness touches upon to initiate specific transformations. Many of them are located on the head. We have the crown, the top of the head, the soft spot located on the top of the head. We have several Bindu points at the back of the head and at the front as well. We have special centers known as akitras. We visit these centers consciously with a specific intent, using them as gateways to higher levels of awareness. Accordingly, everything depends on what a person aims to achieve. If one desires to cultivate specific qualities or superpowers, they need to direct their consciousness towards these centers and stimulate them, thereby activating mechanisms that produce specific results. In essence, the main principle of Shambhavi Mudra is to shift everything related to energy, human psychology, and the consciousness of our egoistic self towards Atman. When I teach Kriya, I do not emphasize viewing Shambhavi Mudra merely as a set of particular points for concentration. Instead, I guide practitioners to direct their full attention towards their true essence. Rest assured, the Creator Himself will arrange the position of the eyes or build the concept of self-realization, a spiritually philosophical aspect of internal realization, in the way that is most appropriate. Thus, we place our trust in the internal processes. Of course, it remains vital to find the correct position of the eyes. We find this correct position when the system is ready and when the required position causes no tension in the eyes. When your eyes are lifted upwards, you draw in more energy. More energy, more possibilities. The practitioner begins to heal. Many people restore their health, including improvement in eye conditions. If we consider that Shambhavi Mudra enables us to discover the higher self, then naturally, the position of the eyes matters greatly. So it is crucial to begin concentrating at such a distance that there is no strain on the eye muscles. Otherwise, as Sri Yukteswar warned, one risks developing squinting. After a period of practice, you may feel yourself carried away by the state, captivated by it. And it is very important not to become attached to it. Attachment to the blissful state is a common trap. Many become ready to do anything to sustain it, which resembles a form of spiritual addiction. Here, awareness is essential. Non-attachment to higher states, all in the name of seeking the truth. Because truth is the ultimate religion. The goal of the process is the realization of the essence, the truth itself. And even this must eventually be relinquished. As you let it go, you become a fully realized person, but that comes with time. Concentration on various points serves to teach you to perceive the subtle nuances of your consciousness. It helps you understand your own psychology and appreciate the fruits of practicing mudras, as they bring about certain subtle transformations. The same is true of Kachari Mudra. Stimulating the base of the tongue produces one state. The tip, when pressed to the pituitary gland, brings another. The middle part, yet another. These are gradations, much like the 7 chakras, each corresponding to different realms. Likewise, a correctly positioned tongue activates mechanisms related to different levels of consciousness within these realms. These nuances are important, though perhaps not, since the ultimate goal is unity with the highest, where the full spectrum, all the colors of this world, are present and revealed in bright, clear light. Accordingly, we strive to uphold the basic principle. Then, by directing attention deeper, we come to comprehend this fully. It's important to mention a concept taught in secret schools of Taoism that closely relate to Kriya Yoga. Honestly, I believe Taoist schools are a continuation of Kriya Yoga. Simpler, external, though still serious teachings. For example, the Zhongyang Jingong school embodies a balanced approach and is currently guided by a very advanced master, Mingtang Zhu. Within these Taoist traditions, there exists the concept of the divine gates. It's a specific eye position in Shambhavi Mudra, where you mentally move 2 centimeters inward from the root of the nose, from the point between the eyebrows, bringing your attention closer to the brain. When you dive inward, an entirely different state arises. Many report that concentrating in this way is easier, and they enter the meditative state more quickly. It all depends on one's level of consciousness and perception. For those who focus only on the point between the eyebrows, it is harder because the external world pulls their attention away. But when the focus shifts inwards, I explain all this in such detail because it is a serious matter. When the focus is drawn 2 to 3 centimeters inward, the practitioner immediately starts to radiate magnetism, entering the necessary state. So, what is the essence? When we explore the principles of working with the Ajna chakra and internal practices such as Shambhavi Mudra, during my seminars, I often share a crucial insight. Maybe you are familiar with it or know the source of information that I am going to share. I cannot consult all the texts, and you are quite knowledgeable and advanced in this area. I even wear glasses. I do eye exercises. They help me maintain a minimal prescription. I read so extensively. Of course, your glasses are your small tool, a minor siddhi in their own right. Perhaps you can recall where this is documented, since I do not read everything, and sometimes, perhaps, this is not really necessary. The key point is this. The Ajna chakra is in the center of the head. I won't specify its nature, exact location, whether it is slightly above or below the center, but it is where your consciousness is concentrated. It is the very throne of Babaji. When you look into the space beyond your closed or half-closed eyes during the practice of Kriya Yoga to perform Shambhavi Mudra or any other technique, your gaze emanates from the center of the head. This is the key principle. When your gaze emanates from the center of the head, you look into a specific space. Though physically the eyes focus somewhere between the eyebrows, the space of perception extends beyond that point. This space arises before you, and this is the secret of Shambhavi Mudra. And when this space arises, you push off from it and extend the link between the center of the head and this space. In doing so, a conscious connection is established. Here lies something, in my view, deeply significant. Through this process, we begin to shape our own spiritual or causal realm and ascend to the causal plane. Kriya Yoga practitioners who correctly maintain Shambhavi Mudra and sincerely perform all related techniques no longer remain bound to the limited three-dimensional world, the physical, astral, and higher mental planes, but rise beyond the causal plane. This is a completely spiritual state. This is how this mentality is formed. When I speak of mentality, I do not mean the mental world as such. Rather, I refer to a mentality infused with spirituality, shaped through the correct practice of Shambhavi Mudra. This happens only when the eyes are held in the correct position and the consciousness is fixed upon a high spiritual principle, one that shapes the causal world. In doing so, you ascend to the causal plane and begin to cultivate self-awareness at that level. Those who have ascended to the causal plane have reached the level of a demigod, if we are to express it in human terms. Naturally, this internal realization is truly profound, and the experience a person receives is not instantaneous, nor is it achieved in merely 2 days or even a month of practice, but unfolds gradually over time, supported by Kriya Mudra and other sacred techniques. For me, this is a sacred act. And then, of course, the magnetism begins to emanate from between the center of the head and the mental plane. Why mental plane? Because initially, when you look inward, you use your mind. But through this, you shape the causal realm, the highest spiritual principle. The causal realm is the causal plane from which all existence originates. For example, Yukteswar told Yogananda that he would never return to earth. He now appears as one who, residing on the causal plane and realized in God, with consciousness unified with God, teaches those who will never descend from the level they've reached. There are various levels, and we can shape this now. This is what we are actually doing. Therefore, Shambhavi Mudra is more than just a mudra. It is divine life itself. You enter a different state of consciousness, a complete shift. You have the opportunity to transform yourself within a relatively short period of time, by virtue of correct, conscious practice. I emphasize that it should be conscious, not mechanical. In Kriya Yoga, mechanical actions do not activate the medulla oblongata. For example, if I hold my hand in a certain way without awareness, the action is mechanical. All mechanical actions drain energy. When we act consciously, when we speak consciously, I recall one of your videos in which you noted an important truth. When a person speaks about spiritual practice, they do not waste energy, they boost it. If someone surrounded by people at a satsang, for example, has to talk extensively in the name of the highest, they might expend some energy, but overall they boost it. Conversely, idle chatter drains energy, strains vocal cords, and so forth. People often wonder, I have to speak for hours at seminars and lectures, and sometimes I sing. And people wonder how my vocal cords remain strong after so many years, provided that I don't work specifically with the throat. This is because we speak about topics that recharge us. As long as the Creator wishes to employ these vocal cords to express the truth, He sustains them. At some point, I may need to commit myself to mauna. Hence, Shambhavi Mudra embodies the practice of mauna, but within the realm of visual expression. I blend various elements, imagery and the sensory organs. Few can speak with their eyes, or hear, or communicate through other senses. You may have heard about clairvoyance. What is clairvoyance? This is the ability to hear beyond the usual spectrum of sound perception. Clairvoyance is the ability to see that we can use from 11 till 12, this sector of the clock face. But much remains unseen because there is no conscious engagement. There is also a notion of listening with the nose. In Russian, for example, this phrase is literally used to denote a form of understanding through smell. How does one understand through smell? Smell is linked to the astral realm. Speaking of meditation, focusing on the tip of the nose can awaken clear smelling, or double smelling. A siddhi, which enables a person to access a deeper spectrum. Dogs, for instance, have not lost this quality. Indeed, theirs may be even more refined. We humans incarnated in this form possess remarkable faculties. We can see with our bodies, hear with our eyes, and perform sensory acts in unusual ways. It seems contradictory, yet this is how it is. When someone says, I heard it, they often mean, I felt it. What does it mean to feel or hear? Certain mechanisms are activated. Shambhavi Mudra is precisely the divine gates I mentioned earlier. Now I speak not only of the Taoist practice, but of the divine gates that enable a person to step into their inner world, turning attention inward and thereby entering a state of meditation. Of course, if a person remains attached to the body, entering a state of concentration, even for 6 seconds, is difficult due to bodily attachments and external connections. Hence, in our practice, we create powerful magnetism. And through this concentration, we draw energy away from the 5 basic senses, shifting consciousness to the spine, the divine cave, and then enter a state of meditation. One of Master Jesus' teachings is recorded in the Gospels. He said, "Enter your temple, close all doors and windows, and talk to the Father." That's what meditation is, entering your temple. We must know how to enter our temple through Shambhavi Mudra, Kriya Mudra, immersion of consciousness, and concentration on special centers. Essentially, we enter our body, shorten the distance between mind and body, and fully inhabit it. We are within. We have entered the temple. Now, as for closing all doors and windows, by practicing Kriya and invoking powerful magnetism, we draw 5 energies away from the 5 senses. At this moment, pratyahara naturally occurs, disengagement of the senses. Then we calmly enter dharana. Here, it is very important to correctly understand Yogi Ramaya, your master, peace be upon him. What did he mean? If one can concentrate for 10 seconds, that is already wonderful. Of course, an ordinary person cannot easily do this, because genuine concentration, even for just 5 seconds, is only possible when we divert energy from the 5 senses and enter the spine, which is an altar where the brain forms the upper part of our church or temple. We reach its dome, where the throne of Babaji resides, and that is concentration. And 5 seconds is quite sufficient. In 5 seconds, the whole universe can disappear or appear, because a second has a reverse side, the expansion of this time. This is an anti-world, an anti-second, endlessly expanding. It's infinite. Within a single second, we can live in eternity, as often happens. Consider dreaming. A person may sleep for only 15 seconds, and yet live through a multitude of images and events. In the astral world, time flows completely differently. Can you imagine how it is at the mental level? And on the causal plane, time doesn't exist at all. In the absence of time, a single second becomes eternity. That is what it is about. This must be experienced. This requires practicing. If there were an opportunity, indeed there always is, even to have a brief, second-long conscious experience of samadhi, everything would change completely. Such people would no longer be able to live an ordinary life. They simply would not want to, though they could. I believe it is very important, while you have described this as the first stage, it is crucial for many to understand that it is not merely focusing on a single point along the central line, but focusing at about a 45-degree angle upward in front of you at a short or even a long distance, but still upward. This is the most basic form of Shambhavi Mudra, yet it significantly transforms the practice of meditation. I would therefore encourage our viewers to give it their close attention. Of course, I keep an eye on the time. This is such a vast topic we could talk until morning, but I still have a couple of questions. Look, one of the key forms of Shambhavi Mudra, strongly emphasized by Yogi Ramaya, is the so-called defocused gaze, known in Vajrayana Buddhism as the Dzogchen gaze. Outwardly, it appears as if someone, usually great masters, barely blinks. However, this is not an essential indication. Satya Sai Baba used to blink, as did many others. Nonetheless, I often observe that Yogi Ramaya could go for hours without blinking, all while remaining fully engaged. Similar accounts are recorded concerning Sri Ramakrishna and others. I'd like to clarify a common misconception. Some believe that if a person does not blink, they must be holy, and if they do, they are not. The Dalai Lama blinks. Actually, many do. Nonetheless, this defocused gaze, where one does not fixate on the point between the eyebrows, but allows the eyes to relax, leads to a state of not concentrating on any single point. Light and color spots appear as we see everything as a whole. That is, there is no fixed point of concentration. For some, defocusing the gaze in this way is easy. For others, it is very difficult. In our tradition, a defocused gaze plays an important role. I know some achieve it easily. Others require many months or even years. Externally, the eyes may appear almost unblinking, though occasional blinking remains necessary. This particular form of Shambhavi Mudra gives rise to remarkably interesting experiences. Today we recalled that we have a physical body, an astral body, and a causal body. The astral body exists within the physical one and appears similar on the subtle plane, but it also has its own eyes. The causal body is somewhat more complex because it is formless. Regardless, when the gaze is defocused, something special happens. Let's say our physical eyes disengage while remaining open, and the eyes of the astral body are engaged instead. This is a fascinating phenomenon, especially evident in clairvoyants who practice healing. I must say, there are very few true clairvoyants and genuine healers. Many people merely imagine themselves to be such, very few indeed. Yet there are those who truly possess this ability. At times when clairvoyants employ their abilities to diagnose others, they close their eyes, and in that moment, the point at the center of the forehead is activated. But sometimes they carry out the diagnosis with their eyes open. What does this mean? This means that although the eyes remain open, the physical vision is disengaged, and in its place a higher function is activated, the vision of the astral body. It is at this point that the diagnosis, specifically medical diagnosis, occurs. I have witnessed such phenomena with Satya Sai, Ganapati Satchitananda Swami, and Yogi Ramaya. For instance, when Satya Sai was asked a question, though it is difficult to speak of him merely as an embodiment of the divine, he would slightly shift his gaze to the side, staring unblinkingly into what appeared to be nothingness. And you know that this divine darshan, manifested through Shambhavi Mudra, enabled him across time and space to carry out certain work. The same is true of Ganapati Satchitananda Swami of Mysore, a great divine teacher and master of Kriya Yoga. When he was approached with a question, he would not simply offer a blessing and move on. He needed to evaluate the situation. He would look slightly to the side, and this was Shambhavi Mudra. The physical eyes appear open, yet they barely see. In such moments, the astral body's eyes are activated, and he would see into the future or across space, then respond accordingly. Such phenomena continue to manifest even today, as seen, for example, in the case of the boy Prema Sai. Yet in Kriya Yoga, this is about meditation. Well, we have many points on the forehead, between the eyebrows and higher up, where we can focus our gaze. This is one approach. Another approach involves defocusing, which is also very important. Meditation with closed eyes is practiced within the Joshin tradition, the Ati Yoga of the highest Vajrayana Buddhist teachings, where defocusing the gaze is frequently employed. What can you say about this form of Shambhavi? Defocusing is a vital practice that allows a person not to cling to images. By defocusing, we engage the visual center in support of the medulla oblongata, activating inner vision, and stop clinging to images. Defocusing is a state in which vision or the visual center is detached, freeing the mind from attachment to any particular image. This allows one to enter a state of objective inner contemplation. Focusing is concentration on an object you have chosen as a gateway. It is dharana for the visual center. Defocusing is the contemplative aspect that prevents clinging to particular images and calms the mind. Defocusing disconnects the mind from any object or the external world as such. Actually, that is all there is to it. It's all very clear. But how does one achieve it? For example, we can now try looking at one point and attempt to see both sides, or our ears. You mentioned a practice I sometimes recommend during retreats. Gradually lifting the eyes upwards, higher and higher, as far as they can go, beyond which they cannot turn, while the inner vision is directed backwards, seeking to perceive from above and behind, from the region at the back of the head. This creates very interesting effects. At this moment, neurons are actively engaged, rewiring the network of connections. New neural pathways are formed, old habits are erased. We establish these new connections consciously through practice. By performing various techniques, we awaken different regions of the brain. Defocusing means looking straight ahead, yet perceiving nothing. As we all know, in a deep meditative state, when the eyes remain open, one perceives only light. We see only light, we gaze, yet there is no distinct vision. Some forms may appear, but they become transparent. You may look at people who ask you questions, yet they no longer exist for you, because everything is unified, one without the other. Some forms remain visible only because you have not entirely severed connection with the external world, especially if you still need to engage with it. Once you enter the ajna chakra, that connection is lost. Your eyes remain open, but the world vanishes, for there is only light. This is how you experience it. Your eyes are open. Your ears remain unobstructed, yet you hear nothing. You divert energy away from the five senses and completely disconnect from all organs that tether you to the external world. It's like switching off your mobile and turning your attention inward. If we limit our discussion to the visual center alone, defocusing occurs when each eye directs its gaze toward a different point, and this is not a purely physical phenomenon. Physically, you can squint your eyes slightly to the right or left. This physical action signals to the brain that you do not wish to concentrate on any image or object, as if saying, "That's it, I'm switching off." When a person loses consciousness, their eyes roll back and become defocused. There is no focus at all. When one wakes up in the morning but has not yet become fully alert, it is difficult to focus the gaze. This is because the connection to the external world has not yet been re-established. The flow of energy is still inactive and does not yet nourish the visual center, as it remains concentrated in the medulla oblongata. During sleep, all our energy flows towards the ajna chakra, and through it we perceive the Holy Spirit. That is why we drift off to sleep. There are different levels of unconscious states and stages of transition, but at one point during sleep, a person disappears completely into a deep state known as turiya, where there is no dreams at all. It's a sleep without dreams, a spiritual state, a dreamless sleep. If someone were to be awakened at that moment, they would see nothing at all. They would immediately enter a phase state, which many fear. They have been awakened, yet remain unalert. The same principle works here. You defocus and command, "I don't want to see anything now. Nothing matters to me. I am free from images, from the world, from everything. My only task is to dwell in this blissful state of contemplation." I would say that a contemplative state serves as an excellent precursor to meditation. Dharana is concentration. Yet when you enter this concentrated state, you enter the state of peace and quiet, a stable silence and lasting peace. This is called contemplation. Those who meditate by focusing on the tip of the nose are in a contemplative state. This is not yet meditation. Rather, it serves to quiet the mind. One's lifestyle and detachment from the world also play essential roles in this process. Monks, for instance, find it easier to enter this peaceful state, as they engage less with the world and focus on the tip of the nose during meditation. However, if they practiced scientific concentration by focusing on the root of the nose during meditation, they would attain complete mastery, regardless of any worldly attachments, and would swiftly transcend the material realm. To be in the world but not of the world. This is precisely the aim of Shambhavi Mudra and all our concentration practices. I believe I have answered the question. Yes, this is indeed an endless topic. Looking at the clock, let's wrap up today's session. Just a quick reminder, we've already released several episodes and have more planned, each focusing on different fundamental aspects of Kriya Yoga. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. Thanks to Swami. We say goodbye to our viewers for now. Be happy and meditate regularly. God bless you. Until next time.